Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, recently reached a definitive conclusion regarding the future landscape of the British monarchy, a decision that sent shockwaves through the very foundations of the royal institution. When they sat down with King Charles at Windsor Castle to discuss the transition of power, they were not there to suggest minor administrative changes. They were there to fundamentally redefine how the monarchy functions after the current reign ends. As the king listened to their proposal, the room went uncomfortably quiet. This was not a dispute over titles, jewelry, or family pride. It was a cold, calculated, and necessary look at the future. The establishment of a single, unified royal household. Before the meeting concluded, Charles realized that his long-held assumption that his widow would inherit a structured, independent, and institutionalized presence had been permanently dismantled. For years, the monarchy has functioned on a model established by the late Queen Mother, where a surviving consort moves into a secondary residence, retains a massive support staff, and continues to influence public policy and charity work for decades. It is a model of continuity, but William and Catherine have identified a significant danger in this tradition. It creates a second center of royal gravity. They argue that when a new sovereign takes the throne, there should be one clear voice, one clear communications office, and one clear chain of institutional authority. Under this new rule, a surviving consort would, of course, retain their dignity, their family standing, and their personal charitable interests, but they would no longer be entitled to an automatic, state-funded second court. The implications were staggering. If King Charles were to pass away, the machinery of his reign would not simply transfer to a new, smaller court around his widow. It would dissolve, allowing the next monarch to leave without the shadow of a previous, competing administration. Catherine's involvement was the most crucial element of this revelation. She did not position herself as an observer. She stood as an architect of this policy. She looked the king in the eye and stated a radical truth. If William were to pass away before her, she would expect the exact same principle to apply to her. She would not want her son, George, to struggle with the burden of supporting a separate, independent court around his mother while trying to establish his own reign. This selfless, albeit heavy, commitment transformed the argument from a personal grievance against one individual into a universal, structural rule that would govern all future generations of the monarchy. As the meeting inside Windsor Castle pressed deeper into the evening, the discussion inevitably turned to the most delicate and politically charged physical asset associated with royal widows: Clarence House. This was not merely an architectural landmark or a convenient London address. It carried nearly half a century of living history. For decades, Clarence House had stood as the enduring symbol of the Queen Mother's enduring influence after the passing of King George VI. To King Charles, that precedent was a source of comfort and absolute reassurance. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that a royal widow did not simply vanish into obscurity the moment her reign concluded. She remained visible, surrounded by dedicated staff, operating an active office, and holding court with the public's full blessing. Yet, William and Catherine were systematically dismantling every single brick of that long-standing assumption. When Charles asked the inevitable question about what would happen to Clarence House under their proposed single-court model, the silence that followed was heavy with decades of tradition. William did not offer a soft compromise or a comforting diplomatic evasion. He looked directly at his father and stated clearly that nothing was automatic anymore. Neither the historic residence, the dedicated communications team, nor the institutional staff. The gravity of this declaration hit Charles with full force. He was being forced to confront a reality where the woman he loved and vowed to protect would not have the safety net of an inherited royal headquarters. In a moment of raw vulnerability, the king pushed back, asking who would protect her if he were no longer there. William's response was measured yet unyielding. She would not need protection from them, because family love and constitutional government are two entirely separate entities. It was at this crucial juncture that Catherine stepped forward once again, reinforcing the absolute fairness of the rule by reminding the room that she was asking for nothing she wouldn't surrender herself. She reiterated that if the unthinkable happened and George ascended the throne, she would never demand that her son maintain a separate, independent court around her just because she once wore the crown as queen. She refused to saddle the future king with the institutional weight of his mother's former authority. This ultimate act of self-imposition stripped Charles of his final defense. He could no longer dismiss a proposal as a personal vendetta or an isolated family score-settling exercise. The rules of succession were changing, and they applied to everyone equally. However, the conversation did not stop at a single generation. As the second page of the confidential folder was revealed, it became abundantly clear that this policy was never just about the immediate transition between Charles and William. It was a comprehensive, long-term blueprint designed for every future sovereign and every future consort in the British monarchy's lineage. The document outlined a universal framework. When any reign ends, the institutional household associated with it concludes simultaneously. While future kings or queens could always choose to invite a former consort to participate in public life, attend major national events, or support specific charities, those roles would no longer be backed by an independent, guaranteed administrative machinery. Authority would have to be explicitly renewed, never automatically inherited. To test the validity of this sweeping principle before bringing it to Windsor, William had previously consulted with Princess N, testing the logic against decades of royal observation. N's response had been characteristically direct and pragmatic. A new reign required a clean slate, and the next monarch had to be given the absolute freedom to lead without competing centers of institutional gravity. Back in the Windsor room, as Charles absorbed the full scope of the names listed on that second page, the king stopped reading as protective husband and began to read as a sovereign looking far beyond his own lifetime. The discussion had evolved from a tense family debate into an architectural restructuring of the British crown itself, ensuring that the monarchy of tomorrow would always remain unified, agile, and centered solely on the reigning monarch. As a profound meeting at Windsor Castle finally drew to its conclusion, the heavy atmosphere in the room shifted from confrontation to an unspoken, solemn acceptance. Camilla had already departed quietly alongside Catherine, leaving behind an environment charged with historical consequence. For King Charles and Prince William, the final moment of that Thursday evening were stripped of all remaining political theater and procedural debates. They were left alone across the table, two men bound by blood and the shared burden of the crown, confronting the ultimate reality of what their decisions meant for the institution they served. Charles did not try to reopen the debate regarding his wife or the status of Clarence House. Instead, his final inquiries focused inward, testing whether William truly grasped the magnitude of what he had set into motion. He forced his son to visualize the very same rule applied in reverse, to imagine a future where George sat upon the throne too soon, where Catherine remained alive and deeply loved by the public, yet stripped of an automatic, independent royal court. William answered without a moment of hesitation, affirming that true constitutional freedom required even the mother of the sovereign to step back from the machinery of state power. It was this unflinching commitment to a unified crown that ultimately sealed the agreement, proving that the policy was never an instrument of malice or personal retribution, but a visionary safeguard designed to protect the monarchy's future integrity. The following morning, Friday the 14th of August, the final text was brought forward for official ratification. In the quiet privacy of the administrative offices, the wording of the document remained meticulously polished, entirely devoid of emotional bias, historical grievances, or pointed barbs aimed at any single individual. It was concise, legally sound, and anchored entirely to a single, unbreakable principle. The next reign would begin with one sovereign, one court, and one working household. Prince William picked up the pen and signed his name first, establishing a precedent that would outlive his own lifetime. He then turned the heavy parchment toward Catherine, who read through the definitive sentence one final time before pressing her own signature beside his. 2 signatures, 1 monumental decision, and 0 public celebration. Both of them understood too well that the document they had just executed carried personal sacrifices that they might one day bear themselves, establishing a boundary that neither could ever pretend was meant for someone else. By evening, the implications had settled across the palace walls like a quiet seismic shift. For centuries, the British monarchy had relied on sentimental traditions and inherited personal networks to bridge the gap between successive reigns, treating continuity as something that could automatically override the authority of a new king. By rewriting this unwritten rule, William and Catherine had chosen a path of radical clarity, ensuring that no future consort could ever inadvertently establish a competing center of political gravity or institutional influence. King Charles had entered Windsor Castle believing he was attending a routine briefing on staffing logistics and future transitions. He left having witnessed the exact shape of the monarchy that would follow his own legacy. The lingering question of Clarence House remained technically unresolved in its absolute physical entirety, but the conceptual battle had already been won. The crown was no longer a sprawling, fragmented collection of competing households and independent power bases. It was being forged back into a single, cohesive entity centered entirely upon the person wearing the weight of the nation's highest office. As the documentary cameras fade and the headlines ripple across the globe, this single meeting will be remembered as the exact moment the British royal family looked past personal comfort, chose institutional survival over sentimental habit, and permanently redefined what it means to inherit the crown.